end of Lamed Beis Omid Beis. I know we sent out quite a few attachments this week, but the main thing we'll get to, I think, is the Lamed Gimel. But let's have a look. Let's go back to this is this is the there's another Mishnah to go. The final Mishnah is on Lamed Gimel Omid Beis, and this is the one before the final Mishnah. And that's on Lamed Beis Omid Beis. We did some of that last week. And one of the things we spoke about was in Lamed Beis Omid Beis. If you remember, when it comes to the mitzvah of shofar, it does not push aside other things. For example, if it's under a load of rubble, you wouldn't be allowed, even muktzah, you wouldn't be allowed to move something which was muktzah, as we said, not climbing up a tree to get a lulav, a lulav as well, actually. But we're talking about a shofar. And then let's just pick this up there at the Gemara. And then we mentioned the point that shofar might be it is, of course, an asay. However, desecrating Yom Tov is an asay and a losa asay. That we spoke about that last week. Ve'ein asay deches losa asay va'asay. We explained last time that there's a positive mitzvah about keeping Yom Tov. There's also, you shouldn't do any malacha. So beware, even though, of course, blowing the shofar, a positive mitzvah, and it's only once a year or 2 days a year, but it's one. You might have thought that it would override other things. It doesn't. Now, keep going. La'olin be'ilon, not climbing up a tree. Roichvin al gabi bahimon, last line of the Gemara, riding on an animal to be able to get hold of trouble walking. So you can't do that either. Says the Gemara, this is quite an important principle. Hashta de rabbonon omruslo, de oraisa mi boy. It's an interesting point. Have a look, please, at Rashi. One of the things you can't do right at the beginning of that Mishnah, it says...
Where are we, Norman?
We're right about Lamed Beis Omid Beis.
I thought so.
Right at the end, we've got the Mishnah, and then we're picking up those 2 lines of Gemara. The Mishnah starts off saying you can't go beyond the Tchum. We've spoken about this principle before. The Tchum, the 2,000 amas outside the city, that is your limit if you're in a city. Of course, if you're... on Shabbos out in the Yorkshire Dales somewhere on your own, you'd have to, again, watch out for this 2,000. It's about a kilometre. You've got a circle around yourself with about a kilometre. So you can walk round, but don't go into the distance. And that's called the Tchum of Shabbos, the same, the Tchum of Yom Tov. You cannot go beyond that Tchum. You also, another point we mentioned just now, is you wouldn't be allowed to move rubble in order to get hold of this lulav. I keep saying lulav. The same rule would apply. Same month, I suppose. Whether it's Rosh Hashanah or Sukkot, you couldn't override going beyond the barrier, as I say. Your shofar or the shul you want to go to is beyond that 2,000 amas, as I say, about a kilometre. It's more than a kilometre away. I would have said that maybe you can override that in order to perform the mitzvah of shofar. No, you can't. Now, the Gemara picks this up and says, have a look at the Rashi, please. Hashta de rabbonon omrus lo. That is the tchumin, the 2,000 amas, itself is midrabbonon. There is a much further distance, which we don't concern ourselves with, which would be Min HaTorah, but 2,000 amas is midrabbonon. Have a look at Rashi. Is it tchumin and removing pikuach hagal, removing a mound of rubble, deleka lemigza otter de oraisa? There's no Avera min HaTorah involved there. There's an Avera midrabanon. There is this 2,000 amas, which you can't go beyond. Again, muktzah midrabanon, important as it is. But the Mishnah says you cannot override an Avera midrabanon even, because they gave it the same strength as a mitzvah min HaTorah or an Avera min HaTorah. Otherwise, people would belittle any ruling of the rabbis. So what's the Gemara saying here? Look at the last slide. Hashta derabonon omrus lo. You've just said that it doesn't override an Avera midrabanon. De'oraisa mi boy. Now, riding on an animal, again, it's true, it's midrabanon, but there's a concern you may start breaking things, twigs, in other words, to lead the animal. Have a look at Rashi De'oraisa Rochri De'ikala Meima Shema Yam Yachtog Zemora. You could say the reason why the rabbis instituted that was it might lead to an Avera min HaTorah, or going up on a tree, De'ikala Meima Shema Yitlosh, you might pluck off again twigs. So it might lead to an Avera min HaTorah. So let's start again. Let's go through Muktzah. Muktzah is midrabanon, not that it leads to something else. It's muktzah is midrabanon, and the rabbis have said it has the same power as an avera midoraisa, and therefore it does not overrule a mitzvah of shofar doesn't overrule a derabanon. An avera midrabanon, which might itself lead to an avera min HaTorah, obviously it's not going to overrule that. I've lost people here. If we're learning in the Mishnah that the mitzvah of shofar does not overrule an Avera midrabanon, for example, the 2,000 amma barrier, which is an Avera midrabanon. They don't want people to start walking all over the place, spend time. It's not time just to go on tiulim, to a certain extent, but not going too far. So it's an Avera midrabanon. Nevertheless, you can't go beyond the barrier to get a shofar to go and hear the shofar. Certainly, if the Avera midrabanon is a gezerah, which might lead to an Avera min HaTorah, clearly it's not going to break that either. So the Gemara's question is, why does it mention two types of an Avera midrabanon? One which is a straightforward midrabanon, and one where the Avera midrabanon might lead to an Avera min HaTorah. Clearly, that would be more severe. If the shofar does not override the former, it certainly won't override the latter. Let me read the Lashon of the Gemara again. Last line. Hashtu derabanon omrus lo. The Mishnah starts off telling us that an Avera midrabanon, the shofar does not overrule that. De'oraisa mi boy, an Avera midrabanon, which was instituted because it might lead to an Avera min HaTorah, mi boy, is that a question? Why do you need to mention it in the Mishnah? Once I know the first category, clearly it means that the shofar will not override anything, right? Says the Gemara, zu ve'en tzorech loyma zu katani. There's a famous style of the Mishnayos, which is called Zu ve'en tzorech loyma zu, where sometimes the Mishnah mentions a point and says you don't need to mention the following. It's just a way. Don't forget, all the Mishnayos were Baal Peh, all learned off by heart. So it's a very good way to learn things, is you start off with something and say, as you would do in English, want to see, Laurie? Just as we, if something which is midrabanon is forbidden, certainly you don't even need to mention it. But of course you do, as you say in English. I don't need to mention that. And you go ahead and mention it. So that's a style adopted by Mishnayos. So don't worry that sometimes the Mishnah starts off with something from which you could actually learn the next rule. but that's
So, Norman, is the Tchum Deraisa? Isn't the Tchum Deraisa or not? Is that much of
not the 2,000 amas. Not
because I was going to say. I see. I thought it was.
Yeah, it is.
Deraisa.
There is a machlokas about that we're learning here. It's midrabanon, but yes, going much further is midoraisa. But the 2,000 amas that we're discussing here in the Mishnah is midrabanon.
Presumably, the reason why they instituted a takon drabanon, halacha drabanon, that you can't go beyond 2,000 amas, is to stop you going the distance that would become a midoraisa.
Yeah, no, it's on its own. They don't want people spending all their time going on great tiyulim. You're right. It's a good point. It's the reason for the 2,000 amas is a straight avera midrabanon. Same like mukta. The idea of mukta, they don't want people spending all their time, taking out their stones and everything in their garden. And so there's rules about mukta, right? So it's a straight midrabanon, whereas sometimes a derabanon is because it may lead to an avera midorai. So that's what the Gemara is saying. So we do have
wasn't it already in the Torah? Wasn't it already about the Alpine Mamo? That was the distance. That was the distance.
Yeah, that's only midrabanon. You raised a good point. Of course, that comes up in Rashi quotes that in Shemos, doesn't he? Where he talks about the 2,000 amas there, but it's not minat Torah. That's only an asmachta, a hint.
Okay, I thought it was okay. Fine. Okay.
It's the good point.
Norman, can I ask what's the problem of going on a tiyul in itself? What's the issue?
No, when I say going on a tiyul, you should be spending more time
in shul.
In shul, on spiritual matters. Rather than just going, for great long walks. Yeah, I mean, you can go.
2,000 amas from the.
You're on a circular route. That's quite good.
But it's 2,000 amas from the last house.
Yeah, that's a long way. I mean, if you're in London, that you've got a lot of area you could walk. You can go through all the parks without any problems.
If they wanted to stop you walking 2,000 amas, they could just say don't walk 2,000 more than 2,000 amas if that's what they wanted. But they say no, it's got to be 2,000.
It's 2,000 amas outside the. They don't, beyond the barrier.
Exactly. So it's not about tiyulim. You can have tiyulim all over the place as long as. What's the halacha deraisa then? What is the halacha deraisa of tiyulim?
Yeah. Hold on 1 minute. Let me just get a. Have a look at Bishalach 1629. I think that's the posuk you were looking at, where the posuk says there, "Shavu ish tachtov" in Bishalach, "Al yetzi ish mimakomo b'yom hashabos." Yeah, if you look at the Rashi there, "Elu alpayim amo shel tuchum Shabbos." People got the Rashi on there. We could actually bring it up if you like. Yeah, where Rashi himself tells us it's only midrabanon. Have you got that posuk? Al yete ish mimakomo b'yom hashavos. Yeah, 1629. You get another chumash. Just press on the posuk itself, and then the other commentaries will come up. Go for commentary, and go for Rashi. Most widely. Keep going down. Shavu from the sage to the. There we are. That's it. That's it. There, Al Yed say, there we are. These are 2,000 cubits of the sum's limit. This is not expressly mentioned here because the command relating to the Shabbat's limits is only institution of the Sofrim. Yeah, it's not actually, I mean, the 2,000 Amos is not. It actually comes up again in Shin Tzadi Vov. Shin Tzadi Vov. I'll give you another source. Ad living here. Shin Tzadi Vov. This is the one you want. Shin Tzadi Vov. Shin Tzadi. Yeah, have a look. This is the bit. Now I'm going to ask Peter. I'm prepared. Let's go for the now. Go back to Sefaria. Go back to texts. Let's go back to come for a roll. Scroll down to Halacha. Go now to Shulchan Aruch. Let's go for, keep scrolling down. Scroll down a bit more. We go to the Mishnah Berurah. Oh, actually, no, go to the Shulchan Aruch first. Press first of all on the Shulchan Aruch, sorry. Scroll up. A bit more further up. Go for Orach Chaim. Go for chapter 397. 397. Shulchan Aruch, Orach Chaim. Okay. Right, now scroll down to Halacha Aleph. Kashay, Kol Odom. These are just telling you the introduction. Kashem She'ein. Now go up to, scroll up a bit more. No, sorry, I meant the other way, didn't I? Kol Odom. There we go. Kol Odom. Yeshlo alpayim amo lechol ruach. A person has 2,000 amos in each direction. Right? Now press and see what we get up. Double click. Commentary. Do we have the Mishnah Berurah on that list of there? I hope so. Mishnah Berurah, yes. Alpayim amo. V'hu takonas Chachomim. De min haTorah, this is Mervin's question. Mutter lahalech ad yud beis mil. 12 mil. Yeah, mil is 2,000 amos, so that's quite a lot. So you got a mil is 2,000 amos, there are 12 of those. Kashir machne Yisrael b'midbar. The area encompassed by the people in the Midbar itself, Shechaziko Yud Beis Mil, Ubeyoyse Mizeh Osa, Kedichsiv Ukedichsiv Al Yetze Ish Mim Koimai. So that's the real translation of Mim Koimo. You shouldn't go outside the camp. Koi Al Hamachane. So there we've got the view that 2,000 amos is midrabanon. When we're talking the min haTorah, it's really 12 mil, a mil being 2,000 amos. So that's a lot further would be min haTorah. In other words, you can't walk the distance of the whole camp of Klal Yisrael in the Midbar. And that's really pshat al yetze ish mim koimai. So it's only, as I say, but keep going. This is interesting, and it may well be that Rashi goes with that. V'hai al yedse eino el azhor le'inim, taking things out from one rishus to another without going into that. So you can see the Mishnah is quoting here. The Shulchan Aruch says every person has 2,000 amos. That's midrabanan. Min haTorah, it might be 12 mil. And it may well be that there are others that hold that even the 12 mil is not min haTorah. It's that's a hint, used as a hint in the Torah, but in fact, it's not really min haTorah, which it may well be that Rashi is going along with that in our Gemara, in which case, it's not because it may lead to the 12 mil, because even the 12 mil is only midrabanan. So clearly they didn't want people to walk too much, but it's all midrabanan. And if you learn according to the poskim that the Mishnah was quoting at the end, walking any distance will be midrabanan and not min haTorah. Are you okay with that? Let's go back to faces. I hope we've. I hope that answers your question. I know this is a bit moved away from the subject, but no, as you've raised it, happy to talk about it. So
this Arba Amos, it seems rather pedantic in the relative to 2,000 Amos to talk about Arba Amos, isn't it? I mean,
that's a separate thing. That's a separate thing.
I don't understand that. What was he saying, the Shulchan Aruch, there?
No, you've got beside. It's true. You're saying it's an extra dalad amos. Every person has their own dalad amos wherever they are. There's never a problem about walking dalad amos. So let's not get confused with your dalad amos, your own dalad amos. This is outside that. We're not talking about the dalad amos. Let's not get confused. It's 2,000 amos beyond a person's own area that's
2004 amos, in other words.
Yeah.
I mean, it's a bit de minimis. I don't think.
Yes. You're quite right. So really, you've got your 2,000 amos. Whether you've got the 12 mil, and that would be min haTorah, is a machlokas haposkim. So it's either that will be the real limit min haTorah, or maybe even that's midrabanan. So in fact, then you'd have two levels. There's the first level, the 2,000 amos, or a second level, which will be much further. But whatever it is, therefore, it's a ruling midrabanan. And what we're saying here is that carrying, we're not talking about carrying here. Going beyond that barrier would be forbidden even to hear the shofar. It's a mitzvah. And it doesn't matter what we're learning, the zuv, which means that even an avera midrabanan could not be overturned in order to fulfill the mitzvah min haTorah. Which you'd say, why not? One's a mitzvah min haTorah, blowing the shofar. And what we've seen here, everybody would agree that 2,000 amos is only midrabanan. But what they've done, and remember, they have the power to do this. The rabbis can say, shave bi'al ta'aseh, which means don't do something, shave, sit, and don't perform a mitzvah. They have the power to tell people not to do that, even though the Torah itself is saying you should fulfill the mitzvah. Yeah. So this Mishnah is telling us that even an avera midrabanan cannot be overturned in order to fulfill the mitzvah of blowing the shofar. Okay, and now we move to a very similar Gemara. But before we do, let's just go back to the Mishnah. The Mishnah says something else. What about if the shofar you need to do some work on the shofar in order that the sound will come out. Ein chaytchin, do not cut it. B'dover shehu mishum shavus, whether the implement you're using is not the normal implement you'd use, in which case you would not be over an avera min haTorah because you're not using the normal implement for preparing a shofar. Ubein b'dover shehu mishum lo sa'aseh, or whether it's a full avera, you cannot do that Avera in order to have a shofar which you can then blow. So it's the same argument here. We start off saying, have a look at the Gemara, please, in Lamed Gimel Omid Aleph. Ein choitchin oisoi. What does it mean? Ein choitchin oisoi. Do not cut and form this shofar. You've got the shofar, the basic shofar. We either with a davar shehu mishum shavus, with an implement which is only it's an avera midrabanon. You're not actually helping form this shofar with the usual implement, or bein b'davar shehu mishum lo saseh. First of all, let's understand, what are we talking about here? What type of implements are we talking about to ensure and make this shofar? You've got, of course, the basic shofar, and you now want to prepare it so that it will be audible and you could blow it. What are we talking about? Have a look at the Gemara, please. Mishum Shavus. What's Mishum Shavus? A maglo. A maglo, a scythe. That's not the normal thing. A scythe would be used for cutting corn, but not using a scythe to be able to form and be masakein the shofar. Lo saseh would be the normal knife that you might be using. Now, what's wrong with all of this? Have a look at Rashi, please. You're being masakein something. That would be a malacha. You're forming a shofar. Yes, of course, you've got the actual basic shofar, but you need to be masaking it to remove and ensure that you could blow through it. That would be considered a tikkun keli, which would be a malacha. So what we're saying here, if you're not doing this tikkun in the usual way, let's say, would be with a knife. But if you're using a sickle or an instrument you normally wouldn't use for this, that would be a malacha not in the normal way, and therefore that would be forbidden midrabanon. Have a look, please, at Rashi. Ein choitchin im bol saknoi loy bedover shehu mishum shavus. What does it mean, mishum shavus? It's an avera midrabanon because you're not forming this shofar in the normal way. That would be a tikkun min haTorah. Have a look at the second line. If you're using an implement which you normally wouldn't use, kagona magla, a scythe. The tikkun kil achayadu. That's called a tikkun in a strange way, like the back of the hand. The aim by elo mishum shvus. That would be also midrabanon, but not min haTorah. The Torah forbids you to form something that you would form in the normal way. What is the normal way? This would be a sakino, a knife. Yeah. Have a look at Rashi. The darko bekach. That's the normal way that you'd use to remove anything from the inside the shofar to ensure that it could be, you could sound the shofar. That would be a malacha gemura. So again, the Mishnah says you are not allowed to use the implement you wouldn't normally use to ensure that the shofar could be blown. That's an avera midrabanon. Or you couldn't use a knife. Seems like you've got a particular knife that you'd use during the week to be masakein this shofar to make it possible that you could blow from the shofar. So again, have a look at the Gemara. Fourth line down. Hashta mishum shavus omrus lai. The Mishnah starts off by saying you can't use an instrument or an implement which you wouldn't normally use. What is the problem about using an implement which you wouldn't normally use? It's an avera midrabanan, because at the end of the day, you've now formed a shofar which could be used. but it's also midrabanon. If you can't do that, lo sa'aseh boy, obviously you can't do a full avera min haTorah using a knife, which is the normal implement to use. Why does the Mishnah bother to tell us that? And the Gemara gives the same answer we gave before, that that's sometimes the style of a Mishnah to mention something. And then he goes on to say, you don't need to say that you can't do this. Of course, it mentions it, but that's just a style of Mishnayos, which is zu ve'ein tzorech loyma zu katani. In other words, sometimes the Mishnah starts off with something saying you can't do something, and then he says, and it goes without saying, obviously you can't do the next item. Same thing here. You cannot use an implement which wouldn't normally be used to be masakein this shofar, forming this shofar, which is therefore an avera midrabanon. At the end of the day, you're still masakein this shofar. Certainly, therefore, the forming of a shofar wouldn't allow you to be over an avera min haTorah, which would be the normal using a knife in the normal standard way. But that is the style of the Mishnah, zu ve'ein tzorech loyma zu. And as you say, it goes without saying, and often one does mention what actually the item is that it goes without saying. You see what I mean? Are you with me, or have I lost people here? So the Mishnah is reckoning out whether it's an avera midrabanon, whether you're forming the shofar in a way which is midrabanon, whether you're going to hear the shofar being over an avera midrabanon. All those things are not permitted, and therefore it goes without saying that certainly you cannot override and desecrate an avera min haTorah in order to listen to the shofar. Important as the mitzvah is, it would not overrule those averas. And that's how the Mishnah concludes. Now, this point, I mean, it sounds strange. This and it goes without saying. Obviously, it's if you say laboring a point, but it's just getting across the idea of nothing will overrule this. Just because you want it just a wonderful mitzvah as it is of blowing the shofar, nevertheless, you cannot desecrate any avera in order to perform that mitzvah. Better not to hear the shofar than hear the shofar if it means desecrating Shabbos, or in this case, desecrating Yom Tov. A very powerful point. Because one often thinks that, the mitzvah of shofar paramount and therefore it would override everything. It's not true. There's a balance. There's always the balance and worth weighing up. And if one has a query about things, then of course one needs to actually address that query to someone who knows the halachas to be able to answer. All these things are very important. Going Yom Kippur, that Day of Atonement, people do want to fast if they can on Yom Kippur. It may be more important the person doesn't fast if they're not up to it health-wise. So it's always important, this balance, and that's really what this Mishnah is telling us, that it won't override the hearing of the shofar, and therefore that's what the Mishnah is coming to tell us. The last part of this Mishnah, it says the following. I'm going back to the previous Amud, the last two lines of the Mishnah. Ein ma'akvin es hatinoikos milit koya. Don't prevent children from blowing the shofar. Avol misaskin imoyim, which means you can busy yourself with them, because as part of chinuch, training, certainly would be okay to do that. Let's have a look at the Gemara here. This brings up a very fascinating point about the ladies. Have a look at the Gemara, please. Oh, actually, before we go there, there's another piece. Do you remember? You can't form using an implement a shofar. Yeah? So you got a shofar from the animal and you want to remove the inside of that shofar so that you could blow it. That you can't do. But there's something you can do. The Mishnah says, and I think Malcolm was going to look into this for us. If you want to pour a bit of lubrication, some water or wine, doesn't mention anything about whiskey, but a bit of wine. Otherwise, you certainly probably get some rather interesting notes if it was full of wine, of whiskey inside. But yes, you can pour water or wine inside. And I don't know, Malcolm, whether you found that useful, lubricating shofars in your time as Baal Tokea.
So it's quite important to have it. There is a sort of moisture level.
Oh, really? So that is something that people do? They pour something down the shofar? I
mean, I would imagine that, that because the whole thing about the shofar is that there's a clear passage. So it might be that, if you're trying to clean it before use, then you might do that. It would be a sort of an obvious thing to do, I suppose. And wine has a certain sort of acidity or something might help.
Yeah. Oh, right. Very good.
But maybe it's a sort of a secret way of somebody being able to drink some wine. No, but I think I think in the process of making it, you sort of use all sorts of things to try and get the core out. So
yes. But what we're saying here is interesting.
Yeah.
Before we said you cannot use an implement on Yom Tov to remove, as you say, the core. That you can't do. But you could pour wine or water down, if we talk about lubrication, which again would help the sound. That is not considered, the Mishnah said, that is not considered a tikkun, actually forming the shofar. Removing
just
the
on
core
that
would
point, on Malcolm's point,
yes,
he needs moisture. I heard quite a well-qualified Baal Tokea said that 1 year he'd washed it and then used a hairdryer to dry it out.
Yes.
And he couldn't get a note as a result. It was over dry. There was
you do need
to he says so as Malcolm says, it probably needs
you shouldn't use a hairdryer on Yom Tov though.
No.
Well, don't you when you get up in the morning, Malcolm? Okay, fine. But I'm just saying but seriously for the clean.
Yeah, no, good point. So you want it to have that, the liquid inside, which would help
There's
the sound.
A balance.
Yeah,
a bit of,
yeah. So what the Mishnah's telling us here is, I might have thought that that's also considered. Imagine you've got a bone dry shofar. Would you be allowed to pour water down it? Says the Mishnah, yes, you can, because you're not really forming a shofar. Removing the core, that's one thing, that's out. But pouring a liquid down to help it, even though maybe, as you said before, you couldn't actually get a note out of it without it, that's not considered tikkun per se. And therefore, look at the Mishnah. Now, very interesting halacha. 7 lines down in Lamed Gimel Amud Aleph. And as we know, nothing's left uncovered here. Mayim oyayin in. Meiraglayim loy. Meiraglayim urine. It's going to be well washed out after that, no doubt, but very interesting. Meiraglayim loy. Now, you may have said that maybe, again, the acidity maybe would be very helpful. You're absolutely, it's going to be washed clean subsequently, but maybe meiraglayim could be used. Says the Mishnah, says the Gemara, no, it can't. That's why it particularly mentions mayim or yayim, but not meiraglayim. Says the Gemara, mani Abba Shaul he. To Sanya, there's a brisa, Abba Shaul omer, mayim or yayin mutter. Kedei letzachtzachai. In order again to actually makes it, in some ways you say moist, yeah, to clean it. Meiraglayim also, and now why not? I mean, clearly it's going to be well washed subsequently, but that's not good enough. Mipnei hakovod.
Just like in Pitum Haktoris. Yeah.
Yeah, I'm sorry?
Just like in Pitum Haktoris, it says.
Yeah, very good. You're quite right. Quite right. Absolutely. It would not be the right thing to use Meiraglaim, even though maybe the note you'll get from it subsequently, even though it's very well cleansed after that, may be extremely helpful in blowing the shofar. That would not be allowed. Mipnei hakovod. It doesn't, as I say. Say that you talk about the reverence, if you like, or whatever of the shofar, and as Mervyn mentioned, the same thing with Pitum Haktoris. Sometimes Raglaim may have been extremely helpful in producing the notes subsequently, but nevertheless it shouldn't be used Mipnei hakovod. And in fact that halacha comes through into the Shulchan Aruch.
Isn't it odd? Sorry, that we should be learning that. I mean, shouldn't it be obvious that Meiraglaim are sort of tameh, or
you're
dealing with something of holy, you're dealing out with a holy item, or
yeah,
that's a good point. You see, a shofar is not a sefer Torah, it's not a pair of tefillin, and I might have thought that if that's the best thing for the Baal Tokea, and I keep stressing because it's going to be well washed afterwards. But if that is the best thing and it will produce the note and very helpful, I might have thought, yeah, you can use it. After all, you're not actually taking the Meiraglaim into the shul. It's only what you've done previously, first thing in the morning before, and then you'd have the shofar ready to be used later on. I might have thought it's possible. You're right. I mean, you're not actually bringing the Meiraglaim into the shul, but maybe it could be used. As I say, it's not a dover shebiktusha, but nevertheless, you're quite right.
Can I just little comment?
Yeah, please.
I mean, I don't say that there's having a little joke here, but it does have a nice rhyme sort of rhythm to it. The whole thing. The way that it's stated, it's almost rhyming. It's almost like you got the opposites, the two things.
Sorry,
the wine and the water, yes, but the Meiraglaim, no, and it sort of has a little rhyme to it, and then it's almost like you can remember it as a little couplet.
Yeah,
and,
yayin, mayim yayin, yes, Meiraglaim, no. Is that what you mean?
That sort of thing, yeah. And then the next one where it says Yain mutar kedei lachatzo mi raglaim asur
Meiraglaim also mipnei hakovod. Yeah, so you're right. It could be easily remembered, but in particular, they're looking at the wording of the Mishnah, very specific. I don't know. Again. Malcolm, you can say if something would be more, the acid maybe of Meiraglaim might be more helpful still than normal mayim. As you mentioned, you said something about the yayin. The acidity of the yayin might be extremely helpful. There might be something in Meiraglaim which would be very helpful. So I might have thought, that really, if you had to select a liquid, that would be the best thing for the shofar. So I might have thought, it's not a dover shebiktusha. It's not a sefer Torah. You're not bringing it into the shul. You're not bringing the Meiraglaim into the shul. Maybe it would be permitted. But what we're saying at the end, you see, back to Mervyn's point, there we'll be talking about bringing something in the ketores, which that's as a korban inside the Beis Hamikdash, but a shofar, and I'm doing it at home privately. And at the end of the day, it is going to enhance the sound. Maybe it would be permitted. But you're right, Sam. In the end of the day, it is actually not permitted because Mipnei hakovod, even though it's not a dover shebiktusha, nevertheless, it's as you say, pasnished. It's not, doesn't seem the right thing to do. And you're right. Therefore, it isn't. And so that would be forbidden. Okay. On we go to this next part, and we're just going to make a start on this, which is fascinating. Ein ma'akvin es hatinoikos militkoya. Don't stop the children blowing the shofar. If they want to blow, let them blow. And train them in. Bit of chinuch. But it mentions Ein Makvin es hatinoikos. Now, tinokos, as we know, have no chiyuv to blow the shofar. If anything, training chinuch, but no actual mitzvah. They're obviously old enough to be able to blow, but there's no mitzvah. Now, there's another category of when we talk about mitzvahs which are positive and are time-bound, then, of course, we go back to ladies. Ladies are exempt from mitzvahs which are time-bound and positive mitzvahs which are time-bound, which includes the shofar, it includes lulav, it includes sukkah, does not include matzah. Matzah, they are mechuyev, and they're psukim for that. But nor mitzvahs aseshas mangaroma, women are paturos. Now, what does paturos mean? This is really the source of all mitzvahs aseshas mangaroma, as we'll see here. Let's have a look at this. Honoshim, if ladies want to blow the shofar, ma'akvin, we stop them blowing. The Mishnah, we're learning a diuk, yeah? In other words, we're learning from the Mishnah. The Mishnah says we don't stop children blowing the shofar. It doesn't say we don't stop children or ladies blowing the shofar if they want to. Why? Because ladies should not blow the shofar. Listen to this. Says the Gemara. Have a look at Rashi before we go further. Tinoikos, fourth line down of Rashi. Hu delo ma'akvim. We don't stop children. Deboil lechanuchayhu. We need to train them in. There's a mitzvah of chinuch. So great, we can teach them on Rosh Hashanah itself. Honoshim ma'akvin, or so we think. Why doesn't it mention about ladies? Says the Gemara, it sounds like ladies we do not allow to blow the shofar. Why? De paturos legamre. They are exempt. The mitzvah saseshas mangaromahu, it's a positive mitzvah which is dependent upon time. Now this is very interesting. V'chitoki, a very interesting Rashi, and when they blow Ika Bal Tosif. Whoa. There's Baal Tosif. Now, the way that's normal understood this Rashi, it looks like they're saying they're really bound to do this mitzvah if we let them blow, which is not true. That's right. It's not a proper mitzvah Baal Tosif. Baal Tosif means they're adding. If they say to themselves, we are commanded to perform this mitzvah, that's wrong. And what Rashi is therefore saying is ladies who want to blow the shofar, we shouldn't allow them to blow the shofar. Keep going. Back to the Gemara. For Hotanya, but we've got a brisa, second wide line, Ein Ma'akvin. We do not prevent loes hanoshim v'loes atitoikos militkor b'yomtov. We've got a brisa which says specifically, if ladies want to blow the shofar, good luck to them. They can if they want to. Now, it's interesting. That brisa seems to disagree, therefore, with our Mishnah. Our Mishnah doesn't mention ladies. As it doesn't mention ladies who are exempt, it sounds like they should not blow. Whereas the brisa says, particularly mentions ladies specifically, telling us that children and ladies, if they want to, they can blow, and we shouldn't stop them. So what do you do with that contradiction between the Mishnah and the brisa? Says the Gemara, Omer Abaya, lo kasher. It's not difficult. In fact, there's an argument between Rabbi Yehuda or Rabbi Yossi and Rabbi Shimon. There is a machlokas tanoim between the great Rabbi Yehuda. That's not Rabbi Yehuda Anossi, Rabbi Yehuda Bar Yonai, that's prior to Rabbi Yehuda Anossi, and Rabbi Yossi and Rabbi Shimon. Normally, when it says Rabbi Shimon, it means Rabbi Shimon ben Yochai, well known from Lag BaOmer and other things too. But so there's an argument between Rabbi Yossi and Rabbi Shimon on the one hand against Rabbi Yehuda. And this depends on a brisa where it talks about a person bringing a korban, and as we've got the Sanya, there's a brisa, Daber el Bnei Yisrael. There's a posuk, which we've got, the beginning of Vayikra. If we can, please, Peter, Vayikra Aleph base, chapter Aleph posuk base. Daber el Bnei Yisrael. Oh, very nice color. Vayikra. Okay. Chapter 1, posuk base. Oh, well, let's have it in Hebrew as well. So we've got the Aleph A. Thank you. Go back to posuk Aleph. Daber el Bnei Yisrael. Speak to, now it's true, Bnei Yisrael sounds like, he translates this as Israelite people. But it says Bnei, you could have said Daber el Yisrael. Bnei Yisrael is very specific. Well, is it or is it not specific? Well, Bnei Yisrael, as opposed to maybe Benos Yisrael, the ladies of Yisrael. Why does it say Daber el Bnei? Now you're right. Bnei Yisrael is mentioned so often, the children of Yisrael, but in fact it's masculine. It doesn't say Benos Yisrael. Could easily have said Daber el Yisrael, if you want to say that. So have a look now back
Surely,
at the.
surely the masculine plural it includes women. I mean, in Hebrew, includes women.
Yeah, indeed it does.
Yeah.
Quite right. Why say it at all? Why say Bnei Yisrael?
Could have been the posuk goes on v'amartu Odom ki yakriv mikem. Is that relevant? The fact we don't often say that a man Odom ki yakriv, because that might not include women.
Yes, but although a man could be translated as a human Odom as opposed to, okay, that's
but it is an unusual thing, isn't it?
Yeah, it's unusual. Need to look at that too. Yes, good point. Good point. Hopefully we'll come to that, although not today, I think. But so Daber el Bnei Yisrael. Now, on that particular Bnei Yisrael, let's go back to the Gemara, please, Peter.
But to be clear, Norman, women can bring offerings, right? That's absolutely.
Oh yes.
So it's not excluding them at this point.
No, well, yeah, but now actually, before you go, Peter, can you please turn to? Can I go back to that and have a look at Posuk Dalet? V'somach yodo al rosh ha'olah. You should lay your hand upon the head of the olah, burnt offering in this case, that it be acceptable on your behalf. V'nitzon lo l'chaper olav. So Laura is quite right. Ladies can bring korbanos too. But then you've got the somach yodo. He should place his hand on the animal. So linking that Bnei Yisrael and the somach yodo back to our Gemara and we'll see there is an argument about this. I say we'll have to follow this through. Daber el ben, can we go now back to the Gemara? There's an introduction. Daber, have you got it? Hor Rabbi Yehuda, fourth wide line, Hor Rabbi Yossi and Rabbi Shimon. Desanya, here's the brisa, and we're going to move from there to our Gemara, which is talking about a shofar. Quite a long, difficult link, or maybe not. Desanya, here's the brisa. Daber el b'nei Yisrael, and the Gemara says, b'nei Yisrael soimchin. Now, it's Daber b'nei Yisrael and a lot more too, because it goes right on to Posuk Daled, where it talks about leaning, placing your hands on the animal. And the Gemara learns, b'nei Yisrael soimchin, ve'ein b'nos Yisrael soimchos. Not ladies. Divrei Rabbi Yehuda. It's particularly coming to tell us that you're quite right. Ladies can bring korbanos, but the leaning on it, v'somach yodo, he should place his hand on the animal, is men, but not for ladies. Rabbi Yossi Rabbi Shimon omrim, noshim soimchos reshus. It means they don't there's no compulsion for them. The somach yodo means the men must. He must place his hand. If he is bringing a korban, we're talking there about a voluntary korban, a man must place his hand on top of the animal first before it's brought. That does not apply to ladies, but there's an argument whether ladies shouldn't be placing their hands or don't need to.
Well, what did you say before? How else could the Posuk have read it? It had to say Daber b'nei Yisrael, didn't it? You said there was an alternative.
Why could say Daber Yisrael? Why b'nei Yisrael? Why b'nei Yisrael?
No, I understand. I mean, it doesn't sound. We don't see.
You're right. We're used to b'nei Yisrael.
We never see anyone as Daber Yisrael. It sounds a bit. It's clumsy. It sounds, doesn't it? Daber Yisrael. But in any case, it seems the whole limud is from the Somach Yodo, isn't it? And not.
Yeah.
Yes.
Have a look at the Rashi here. Have a look at the Rashi. B'nei Yisrael soimchim, daber el b'nei Yisrael v'omato aleim, odom ki yakriv mikem, a person. And as Benji said, you've got the word odom there. Uchesiv bahu inyan, v'somach yodoi. Now, what they're doing, putting all that in the melting pot together, they are therefore saying that it's only applicable to men. Now, it's true, B'nai Yisrael includes ladies who can bring korbanos, but we're limiting that and saying together with the Yodom and the Yodo, we're saying that when the mitzvah of smicha, which means placing hands on the animal, that is not going to be applicable for ladies. So it's putting
the point about Odom
together. I'm sorry?
Isn't Odom both? You say Odom kiyomas ba'ohel, that applies to women as well, doesn't it? Are women not becoming?
Yes, you're right. Odom kiyomas, yes. So we'll have to understand this a bit more perhaps next time. We're putting everything in this pot together. You've got the somach yodai. So notice Rashi doesn't mention the Odom at all. All he mentions was the somach yodai coupled with the B'nai Yisrael.
Odom is mentioned in Rashi.
It's mentioned, it's true. But Odom normally means a human. Like Odom Arishon.
But so does B'nai Yisrael means everybody, and Samach Yodo might include women.
Might it Yodo, his hand, their hand, Yodom? Yeah. It sounds like it's limiting that. It's not. You're right. It's not focusing on the Odom. I know you mentioned the Odom, Odom sounds like well, of course, you'd have to see what limud we learn from the Odom. That's a separate piece. We'll have to come back to that too. So lots of issues here to think about. But look at the last part. Soimchos Rishus, Alma Afal Gavda Potrinu Kro. The Torah seems to be exempting them, and we'll have to understand this more next time. The Torah is exempting ladies. Nevertheless, there seems to be an argument whether ladies can, if they want to. Leka Isura. And just to conclude, so we need to understand this more detail next time, will be well. But what we're getting to is where there's this exemption, how we learn out the exemption, we'll follow that through. There's an exemption for ladies to do semicha, which means placing their hands on the animal. And there's an argument whether that exemption means there's no mitzvah for them at all, or they can if they wish. The same thing we're saying with all mitzvahs, where, interesting, mitzvah seishaman garom, although bringing this korban is not necessarily dependent on time, but nevertheless, the Gemara is comparing the same idea that when ladies are exempt from something, can they, if they wish to, do that mitzvah or not? Are they exempt? No point. In which case we won't ask them to do it. Or do you say if they want to, they can? Now, just to make this even more complicated, even if you were to say that if they want to, they can they make a bracha? Because the bracha says, Asher kiddushanu b'mitzvosov v'tzivonu. He commanded us. Now, if you're saying ladies are exempt, they can if they want to, maybe. How can they say v'tzivonu? He commanded us to do the mitzvah. So there are a few things to think about, which we need to develop. Number one, we're saying there seems to be an argument about whether ladies are involved in this mitzvah of Tekiyah Shofar at all. We're comparing it to the smicha, just like we see over there, that there's an argument whether leaning hands, there's total exemption or it becomes voluntary. We're saying the same idea, we're moving across to shofar, and indeed to all mitzvahs asay she'azman garama. Then we need to understand and how we're going to paskin out of all of this. And even if we do paskin that they can perform the mitzvah if they wish, will there be a mitzvah? Now, all this will have to come out into halacha, and we'll see here a very interesting, again, not tonight, machlokus between the Sfardim and the Ashkenazim as to the performance of mitzvahs by ladies. So again, watch this spot. That's just the whetting the appetite. Hopefully as we follow, and then you see there's a long Tosfos. We're going to be doing all that Tosfos, but parts of that will be relevant in this argument about whether you're exempt from something. Can you make a bracha even if you want to do it and it's a voluntary? It may be no mitzvah at all. So that's something we need to understand. So sorry to leave you hanging, but that's where we're up to tonight. Yeah, lots of things to think about in the Psukim. Thank you, everybody, for contributing. And thank you, Peter. And good to see the others with us too.